everybody, Invisiblekatana here with my review for the Uncharted film. So of course, it's Uncharted, the latest video game movie. And it was decent. Just to kick things off, it was decent. As you can see, I clearly like Uncharted. I have all the games. I even bought the first 3 games again, even though I legit have not played this yet. I only bought it because they added photo mode, and it was like $10. But I haven't actually even played the collection. But I love Uncharted. I have the records for all the games, actually. I even have lost the record for Lost Legacy, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the original classic Uncharted, sort of, because this is not only a totally different universe, clearly, but it's also technically a prequel to everything we have right here. And it was alright. It was alright. I didn't hate it. I wouldn't say I loved it, but I spent like $5.75 because I actually got to go. I was able to go see it earlier in the day, and I was like, cool. Definitely for that price, it was worth it. I think this is actually one of those movies where, if you have the option for D-Box, well, where I'm at, it's called D-Box with the moving seats, but D-Box, 4D, whatever it's called where you're at, I think this might actually be worth it. Like, the stuff that they do is entertaining enough. Like, they kind of channel a decent amount of stuff that is for sure Uncharted. It's like, okay, he's doing a bunch of jumping. Oddly enough, I actually saw a review and they mentioned this, and I thought it was super funny, because I was like, I noticed it a lot, but it didn't occur to me to say it in this way. Tom Holland does more jumping around and parkour stuff in this Uncharted movie than he has done in any of the Spider-Man movies, at least as an actual person. Like, sure, they do like all the CG Spider-Man flips and kicks, but in this he actually does like a lot of legit parkour. Like, he's jumping, he does like little jumps off walls and stuff, and I was like, huh, I didn't think of it that way. But I definitely noticed. I was like, oh, he's actually, and it's really him. For anyone who doesn't know, he actually does gymnastics, or he used to at least. So when he started as Spider-Man, that was something that they knew they could utilize. So some stuff he actually does on his own. But they use it way more in Uncharted than they've ever used it as Spider-Man, which I thought was really funny. But he actually jumps around a bunch. He does some parkour, and he's okay as a young Nate. Of course, the big thing that everyone kind of hates is Sully. And there will be spoilers in the second half of this review, so I'll get to some of the story elements of why I either do or don't think that they kind of capture the specific characters. But I definitely didn't like, what the F is his name? Mark Wahlberg as Sully. And for me, it was way less so his acting, even though, there are those moments, the classic, The Happening. What? No. It was in there. It was in there for sure. But the character is what I didn't like nearly as much. And I'll talk about that, more so in spoilers. But the simple version of it, without spoiling anything in the actual story, is that he was kind of a douchebag. And not like Sully's like, oh, he's, they make their quips back and forth, or even Sully when he was in 3, when they have like the flashback stuff, and he was like, okay, like, they're all thieves, that's kind of a thing, no honor among thieves. It's literally the title of the second game is, Among Thieves. So it was like, okay, understandable. All the characters are kind of douchebags in some way, shape, or form. But he was kind of just an a-hole in this, and there's some specific story elements I'll get to, but I was just like, wow, it's not like he's just kind of different. It's like a different version on something. It's like, he's just an a-hole that I just don't like, period. Through like a big chunk of the movie. And I was just like, that's why I didn't like it as much. I thought Chloe was fine. I thought she was fine. Honestly, I feel like they can do more with her character. If they get a sequel, I think the sequel, if they get enough money off of this, I genuinely believe that they could do a sequel that would actually be pretty good. Like, based on the way the movie kind of builds up, it's definitely an origin story leading into, the Uncharted franchise, with, some changes here and there, of course, backstory and all that. But I was like, okay, I think they have potential. They definitely did a decent set piece, and once again, I'll get into that with spoilers, but it was cool. It was definitely a decent movie. It's something where I'd say, it's worth seeing. I think you should see it in theaters. I think it's definitely one of those movies where it's like, you might not be like blown away or anything, but I don't think you'll hate it. Some people do, and of course that's always the thing, especially if you like the games. It's always hard to go into something and be like, what's the adaptation versus, the original thing, especially when it comes to video games. Like, it's one thing when it's, like anime going from animation to live action and adaptations there. But when it's going from video games to live action, it's like, well, the difference is that I actually played the video game. Anything that I saw in the movie, like, and this is in the trailer, but they do the scene from Uncharted 3, the plane sequence, and it's like, okay. When I was watching it, I was just like, meh, it's alright. Like, it looked okay, it looked cool. And I think it was just because I was like, I've already experienced this, and it wasn't like I saw this animated and now they've made it live action. It was literally like, I played this. Like, it's way more entertaining because I felt like I was in it, compared to like, okay, I'm seeing it happen now. And it's just like, yeah, it's just not as epic. So it's definitely a difference from, like I said, an anime adaptation to a live action movie versus a video game adaptation, going into a live action movie. Because it's just so different watching something when it's not like, oh, I watched the animated and now I'm still watching it. I was literally like the reason I either, if you die, you don't get through that whole sequence, of course. So it's like I was the one literally making it happen. And it's just like, yeah, that will infinitely, for me at least, I mean, I'm curious how that would work for people who don't play games. I've never even thought of that before as far as adaptations where people aren't gamers. And it's like, well, if I had you play this, how would you feel about it? Like, if they don't care about games, that might not mean anything. But I love the games, and I love video games in general. So for me, it was like, oh, well, it's a lesser experience. It's still cool to see, and it was done well. But it's just like, well, I played it, and it was way cooler to play because it was like, that's fun to play. But they do some other stuff that doesn't happen in the games, and it's like, okay, well, I haven't played that, so it was completely brand new. It wasn't just something that I knew that looked cool, but I would rather play it. It was something that was brand new and totally fit in Uncharted. And once again, that is 100% spoilers because that's like towards the end of the movie. But all in all, I'd say it's worth checking out. I think it's a decent film. They are obviously pushing for some PlayStation stuff. One thing I didn't mention is that they have like just how they do the PlayStation Studios logos before their like AAA titles now, which I think looks great. They have a PlayStation Productions logo now, which you can find on Twitter if you want to see it. But if you're thinking about seeing this, I would say don't watch it and just wait till you see that in theaters, because I was like, I know I'm going to see the movie. So when I saw it on Twitter, I was like, nope, I paused it and I was like, I don't want to see this until I see it in theaters. And it's great. I was like, for me, it was just like, holy crap, they're like video game characters on the big screen. And it looked amazing. And I was like, this is awesome. And it was really cool. But Sony definitely wants to make movies based on their video games. We have Uncharted, which legit, they have been talking about doing this for like, I swear it has to have been almost a decade. Like, it's been such a long time. Mark Wahlberg was supposed to be Nate, and he aged out of it. So they've been talking about this for a long time. It was like the freaking Assassin's Creed movie. That was legit over a decade. I swear it took forever for that movie to come out, and people kind of hated it. But this, I would say, was definitely more entertaining than that. I didn't hate that one either. I just thought, I really thought, man, it was all right. This, I actually did have parts where I was like, all right, I'm at least genuinely, there are parts where I'm like, I enjoy this. And there are things that when I look back on the movie, especially the ending of it, that's going to be the thing where I was like, okay, not only was that, did it feel really Uncharted, but it also wasn't from the games and it was only in the movie. And it was actually really great. It was really well done. So I think they have amazing potential for an actual sequel to be entertaining and be a really good movie. But all in all, it is still just a video game movie. It didn't reach the peaks of, for me, I think Sonic is where we're at as far as like the best video game movie now. It didn't reach those heights, but it's also the game, the movie based on the game, which is clearly based on Indiana Jones. So it's a weird full circle, and that's been kind of the big topic for years. As far as making this a movie, it's like, it's literally based on movies. Like, that's the whole point. Like, especially these games, like Naughty Dog, that's kind of what they do now. Uncharted and then The Last of Us. That's like their thing now. Is like their movies are pretty much games, and you have interactivity now. So it's a very interesting thing because it's not like other games where you just play like, it'd be like making. Well, they actually did that. They made making a movie of Doom, but it's like Doom is just shoot demons, go forward, shoot some demons, and some of the demons you punch and kill. Like that's it. That's Doom. There's a story in there. But that's Doom. That's what you do. And if you made a movie, you could do some different stuff. Uncharted is literally like, I want to know what the characters are doing. What's their relationship like? Are they married? Are they not? Like, you actually care about the characters because they talk about that stuff. It really is like a movie or a series, since they're like 5 games now. 6 if you count the PSP. But I thought it was interesting. I was like, okay. They did a good job, going forward with the first movie. Of course, a boatload of references, and I'll talk about some of that in spoilers. But I say check it out. I think it's definitely worth seeing in theaters because I do think it's an experience where you'll see it once and you at least be, hopefully, if you're kind of in the same camp as me, you'll at least be like, all right, it didn't blow me away. But as a movie-going experience, it was a classic popcorn movie experience where you're like, okay, they got some funny jokes, they got some decent action, the sort of puzzle mystery element of the classic Uncharted stuff, like, oh, there's gold, it's treasure. So that classic storyline, and it's like, all right, yeah, it's entertaining. Who's gonna betray who? Because that's like one of the things I think they do fairly well, where it's like, that's a big part of Uncharted, going through, especially when they have like the villains of each game, where it's like, all right, this is someone that one of the characters used to know. They kind of switch it up in this, which once again, this is in the trailers, but Chloe is in the movie, and instead of knowing Nate, she actually knew Sully before she knew Nate. So it's like, oh, okay, that's a bit of a difference there. But they have the characters that come in and, the villains, like kind of one-off villains, like, oh, here's the villain of the game sort of deal. And so they kind of handle that, and I was like, all right, the betrayal stuff and how this plays out and things like that. I was like, all right, that felt very Uncharted, because that's definitely a thing that happens throughout the franchise, where it's like, can you trust this person? Is this person actually going to team up with you? Are they going to betray you? Like, They do that a lot in the Uncharted games, and I was actually fine with that because that's a really big part of those games. When you really look at it, every single game kind of has that element of like, oh, I used to know you, or it's a big part of actually just flat out being betrayed or seemingly being betrayed. Like they do so much stuff with that, especially 2 and 3. Actually 2, 3, and 4 they really do it. In the first one, not as much, but 2, 3, and 4 they 100% have that in there as an element of the gameplay. Like somebody knew somebody betrayed somebody at some point. They knew the person they betrayed, or they didn't know the person they like. It's 100% a part of Uncharted to just have a character be like, are they gonna stay in this alignment, or are they gonna switch at some point in the game? You genuinely don't know. So they captured that pretty well, and all in all, captured the action, they captured some of the comedy, and it was good. So I say it's a good popcorn flick. I say check it out if you got the means and the time, and nobody was there. So if you're worried about, ye old virus, I went and I was like one of 5 people. Granted, it was like the middle of the day. I saw it like 1 or something, but still, I was like, there's like 5 people. So it could be different, going like later in the day, but it was super easy for me. I was like, oh, there's like nobody here. So if you're worried about, like I said, ye old virus, you might not need to. It's the Uncharted movie. I feel like, no joke, even as someone who plays video games, watches video game videos on YouTube, all that stuff, I legit didn't even remember this movie was coming out until last week. I was like, oh, I remembered it was coming out. I had no idea it was this soon. I legit thought it was like still like 2 months away or something. And then I watched something, they were like, hey, Uncharted's like next week. And I was like, holy crap, they have not, I don't watch TV, but I watch a bunch of YouTube, and I do have ad blocker. I just thought of that. I was like, because I have not seen any advertisements. I have ad blocker. That might be why. So maybe it has been getting advertisements, and I just didn't realize that. But in my head, I hadn't seen anything on this game, and I'm like, they didn't advertise it. They probably did. I have ad blocker. I legit forgot about that because I'm like, man, I haven't gotten any advertisements. I forgot, and I don't watch TV, so I don't see it. But even the little commercials I did see, if I was on a site where I got ads on the side and stuff, I still never saw anything Uncharted based. And I mean, all I do is play video games, so they're watching me. They know that any video game movie is something I'm interested in. So still interesting. Did not see a lot of advertisement for it, but either way, I'd say it's worth checking out. So go do that. Play the games for sure. Like if you're like, should I see the movie or just play the effing games? This is $10. You probably don't even need a sale. It's probably $10. It might be $15. 1, 2, and 3. Perfect. It's good. It's 60 frames per second. Get Uncharted 4. If you have a PS4 or a PS5, you can get it. Especially if you get a PS5, you can get the Uncharted. What the heck do they call it? I forgot what they call it. Like, Thieves End Collection or Legacy Collection, but it's Uncharted 4 and Lost Legacy bundled together. Definitely get it. So, highly recommend the games, and I kind of recommend the movie. I think it was a fun popcorn flick. So, officially getting into spoilers. There's not going to be too much to talk about because I'm just kind of going to shoot through it as far as the spoilers are concerned. So, if you have not seen it, go check it out, then come back. If you haven't seen it but you don't care, here we go. Sully is just an asshole in this. Like, he just betrays people. He doesn't care if they die. I'm like, I know this is different, but Sully wasn't that bad. Like, he's literally a partner with the main villain of the 3rd game, and like in the flashback scene you actually get to see Nate when he's a kid, and so that's how he initially runs into Sully. Sully wasn't like, hey kid, I'm gonna shoot you in the face and take this thing that you just took. He was basically like, oh, like you're a good pickpocket and stuff, which they do in the beginning of the movie, and I was like, okay, this is a really good interaction. It literally starts off, Nate, I almost said Tom Holland, but Nate ends up stealing like this diamond cufflink off this woman, or a bracelet, and so he's talking her up and stuff, and he steals the bracelet, pockets it, and everything. Sully talks to him, and he pockets it. Like he basically does it before he even ends up talking to him. Like he just walked past him, or Nate walks past Sully who's sitting at a booth. He literally was just like boom, and he took it out like no problem before he even actually started talking to him. And so they had this little back and forth. He wrote like "Thou shalt not steal," and I was like, that's a good interaction. That's a great first interaction between Nate and Sully. That I saw 100%. And then the movie kept going. And I was like, oh, okay. They changed up a couple things, and so like one of the villains who ends up becoming like the main villain, I think her name is Braddock. So she works for whoever Antonio Banderas' character is. He's like the rich dude who had the family and all that stuff. She was a former student of Sully. And it's like, she kind of hated him and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, I could see that. There are a lot of people, and she kind of represents a little bit Nadine from the 4th game, especially because like the whole sequence that they go to an auction house and all that is straight out of the 4th game. And it was like, okay, she kind of represents that just a little bit, which they also kind of tie in with the end of the game being like gold specifically on a pirate ship. And I was like, okay, this is cool. Like, she was actually like a former protege of Sully, and she hates him and stuff like that. So I was like, all right, it adds a bit more of a connection, but not too crazy, not too far out there. It's like someone doesn't like Sully in that business. That's a normal thing as well in the Uncharted games. Like, once again, he literally used to work with the main villain in Uncharted 3, and then he was her enemy during the present, storyline where he's actually Nate's friend. So it's like, all right, he deals with people, they stop liking him, things like that. But him being just like a straight up a-hole where it was like he was gonna abandon, like they literally had to have the arc of him being like, I'm not gonna literally sacrifice someone's life. That was like a huge deal for him where he let the gold go at the end. And I was like, for Sully, that just seems too far. It just seemed weird that they had to make it that character. He still could have been the same person he had been the whole time, just not an absolute a-hole about it. Like, he could have told Nate that his brother was potentially dead, which I totally saw. I was like, yeah, I've played the games. I know he's gonna somehow be alive, and they want to explain it. They of course keep it vague where they don't actually answer the question in the movie because Nate asked Braddock, like, did you kill my brother? And she doesn't have the opportunity to actually answer the question. So I was like, okay, he's totally gonna be alive. Surprise, surprise, he's totally alive in the prison, just like Uncharted 4. So we'll see what happens there. But he didn't tell him that his brother was dead, and then of course Chloe being in, or potentially dead, and then Chloe being in this was the same thing where she used to work with Sully, and it was like she hates him too because like all he does is backstab people, and I'm like, that's not really what Sully was about. Like, he may have done it, like I said, Uncharted 3 is like the main example of that, where he did it against Marlowe, I think is her name, from 4 or for 3, sorry. And it was like, okay, that was a very specific situation, mostly because it was like he wasn't going to kill a kid. That was like literally the main point. It was like he didn't want to kill this kid. He didn't want to deal with that. So it's like, all right, I'll stick with the kid. And then that was pretty much how that relationship formed. It was kind of like he either chose to stick with Marlowe and be a child murderer or stick with the kid and be like, hey, I'll help raise you and we'll basically survive together. And it was like, okay, that's how it started. And in this, it was like he knew Sam before he knew Nate. He knew Chloe before he knew Nate. And so he kind of tricked him. Was like, oh, if we basically, he would kind of imply that if we go on this adventure, we may or may not find your brother, even though he totally assumed he was dead, and it was kind of a dick move. But it was just like, it was just an interesting moment where it was like, man, they couldn't really have written it. I mean, they could have just done it where he just wanted to go on this adventure because his brother went on it, and they could have done it where it was like, hey, I found you because your brother's dead or something like that. They could have just done it where he was like, he told him the truth in the beginning and it's like, I hate to meet you this way, but I have to tell you that your brother is dead. We were going on this thing, and it's like, I know that you were connected to this. He literally could have just done it in the pretty much almost the exact same way that he did it, but just told him that his brother died. And I think the movie could have gone along the exact same way, and I would have believed it, because it would have been like, Nate, I mean, honestly, it's exactly what happens in Uncharted 4. Nate is out of the game. He doesn't do, like, the big adventures and stuff. Sam comes along, and it's like, hey, it's obviously different because it's actually his brother, not someone saying your brother's dead. But he thought his brother was dead, and then they go on this adventure, even though he's not really a part of that anymore. He goes back into it. And that's the whole point of that story, because obviously he's much older in that game compared to the movie. But they could have done the same thing and been like, your brother died. It was this mission, which they reference in the beginning. They do the whole flashback, like, yeah, this is the map and all that stuff. And it literally could have just been, my brother's gone. I never got to see him again. This is as close as I'll get, and I'll find the treasure that he couldn't find that we always talked about, and that will give me a sense of closure on having lost my brother and not having seen him for over a decade. Totally could have worked. Exactly the same. And Sully wouldn't have had to have been a complete douchebag where it's like, I think he just wants to let them all die. And it was just like, they easily could have done that and had like the character from the game be Sully. So that was my main gripe. Whole movie, that was my main thing where I was just like, I just don't like that Sully was that bad of a person. And then of course he changes at the end and they're friends. But that was like my main thing. I was just like, God, he's just so unlikable. And it's crazy. And like, that's why Chloe ends up betraying them, because she worked with, we'll just go Braddock. Like, Antonio Banderas gets killed off. Oh, well. So he ends up, she's working with them, and it's like, that's why she did that, because she didn't trust Sully from the very beginning. And it was just like, if he wasn't such a horrible person, that wouldn't have happened the way that it did. So of course the movie would have changed a little bit, but even then they could have still done it where she betrayed them. And once again, it'd be like, oh, that was a really dick move on her part, but she wanted more money, and maybe she just didn't trust Sully as much. Exact same situation. Like I said, she kind of trusts him just enough, but it's like, he got to me first, and things like that. You characters betraying each other. It's like a classic thing. Actually, that's literally what happens with Chloe. Once again, they have stuff in the movie where it's like, that's basically exactly what happened in the game anyway. It's just like slightly more intense in the movie, like, oh, you betrayed me. But it's like, that's basically exactly what happened in the game. She didn't know that in the game, of course, and she did it by choice in the movie, but still, it was pretty much the game, and so it was kind of, just more intense. But they go through, they're dealing with the treasures, they got the crosses, they go through piece by piece, they're figuring all this stuff out. And, we kind of go through, we get the betrayal, we get Antonio Banderas killing his father, then we get to the train sequence. Or, I'm sorry, the plane sequence. So, everything's going through, they're finding bits and pieces, they end up finding the giant urns, they end up having salt instead of gold, and it was like, oh, we thought this was the end, but it's just another step. I'm very confused, because they do a classic movie thing, where I'm like, they were underground, they didn't know where they were going and whatnot, they find these urns, they thought they were the gold, it turned out to just be salt, and then there was a map in there to actually lead to the gold. So Chloe ends up doing the betrayal. She knocks out Nate, and then it fades, and it cuts to Nate waking up, and Sully's like, "Oh, she pulled one over on you," and I'm like, "Where did she go? How did she escape? Where did she go?" Based on how they got there, I was very confused how she got out, and they don't show them get out either. Like, I don't know how she got out. I don't know how Sully got in. I don't know how Sully and Nate got out, because they don't show any of that. And like, the whole point of that exact sequence was they didn't have a way to connect to each other, and he had to like drop the cross down the grate so that they could actually unlock the next door. And so I'm like, they just got out. They just like, it is what it is. But that was like a classic movie thing where it's like, they definitely didn't touch on the weird tunnels and secret stuff going from place to place. Like, they literally just left a room that was completely flooded full of water, and that's how they got to the next segment. And then they crawled through a hole, and then they were like in this ancient burial spot with a bunch of salt urns. And so then it was like, I assumed there was a door there somehow or whatever, but not a clue how Sully got in there. But he did. Chloe somehow got out of there, and then they both, Sully and Nate both got out of there. So I was very confused by that, because I'm like, I feel like I kind of needed an answer for like where the secret tomb just randomly let out at. But to go through that whole process, we get to the plane, we have the betrayal of Antonio Banderas killing his father, Chloe betraying the guys, and so we get our plane sequence from Uncharted 3. And then we have Antonio Banderas being betrayed by Braddock. She kills him. Turns out that all the henchmen and stuff are cool working for her, and she's like, you didn't have the guts to do this or that. And it was kind of like, he just wanted to be super rich, which is what they do anyway. So I don't know what her deal was, where it was like, he was ordering you to basically kill people anyway. It was like, I was confused where she was like, hey, you don't have the guts to do this. And I'm like, he literally hired you and then hired someone else, because it was like, you aren't really getting the job done, which would have totally included killing these people if need be. I don't care. I want the money. So it was weird to me that she was like, yeah, you didn't have the guts to do this. And I'm like, I don't think that's true, because he literally hired every single person to do whatever it took so that he could get the money, including killing his own father, literally while he sat in the front seat, and she killed his dad in the back seat. And he was like, sorry, Dad. So I'm like, I don't know where that concept of like, yeah, you don't have the guts to do anything came from. And I just thought that was a weird line for her to put there, or for them to have her say, because I'm like, not having the guts is literally like the worst example of why he should have died, because it makes no sense in the context of what he did in this film, as far as hiring a bunch of mercenaries to do whatever it took, including killing his father so that they couldn't give up all of the money that they already had, so that he could look for this treasure and get even more money. So I thought that was weird, because I'm like, that kind of makes no sense to say that he has no guts and then kill him off. But they did it, and that's all there was to it. And they didn't even need to do that, because he could have died at the end of the movie, and it would have been the same, because classic Uncharted, everybody who's bad ends up dying. That's just how it goes, except for Uncharted 4. So they easily could have done that, but it was like, all right, let's kill him off now so we can kill her off later. And I think that was it. I think that was why they did it that way, because they're like, well, we have to kill them both off, because we just got to get rid of all the bad guys. So let's just have her betray who we thought was the main bad guy, and then she's the final bad guy, and then they defeat her, and she dies at the end too. And I was just like, I guess that was why they did it. It was just to kill off all the bad guys, so there was no attachment, going forward in the sequel. They wouldn't have to be like, oh, this guy lived, so we got to worry about him. It was like, oh, she betrayed him and killed him off, and then they all lose, and all the villains die. I think that was genuinely it. It was like, let's make this as enclosed as possible and just kill him. Kill everybody, however we need to. Kill him, she betrayed him. Plane sequence, pretty good. Weird thing in the beginning of the movie, they do the flashback. They start off at the plane, and then they go like 15 years later, and then they go forward, and it's like present day. And it's like, don't think that counts as present day, because the present day would have technically been him on the plane, because that's where you started the movie. So that was weird. I definitely noticed that, and I was like, oh, that doesn't really work. You can't say it's present day when present day for me now is the plane. Like, most of the movie is technically a flashback until you got to the plane sequence, but they called it present day, so it was just like, okay, I guess it's present day then. But that's a weird thing. You can't really do that. But I was like, whatever. It was just a random thing where I was like, oh, technically that's not true. But it is what it is, and you just watch the movie anyway. It doesn't really matter. But it was something I noticed. So I was like, oh, that makes me feel weird. My OCD is acting up because you said 15 years ago, and then you said present day, and then it took like 3 or 4 extra days before they actually got back to the plane sequence, and I'm like, that doesn't make it present day. So that was just a weird OCD thing that kind of bugged me for like that split second, and then you forget it, and it doesn't matter. But plane sequence was good. Bunch of people die. He gets hit by a car. That was actually pretty decent. And they kind of change up, instead of him dropping down in the desert, he is actually with Chloe, and they both end up surviving by holding onto the canister. That was actually exactly the same, or container, I should say, not canister. But they pull the cord and they both land in the water. And then instead of it being once again the desert like in Uncharted 3, where he just walks and walks, and then eventually he finds a place, which I always thought was funny in the game. Like, he's like dead tired because he walks for legit like a full day and stuff without water. And once you get into the action, I don't think he drinks any water, and then he's just like back into it because like, you got to kill people now, and he's full energy and everything. But I'm like, he didn't drink like a sip of water. He just fell into a room and it was like, oh, I got to kill these people. Energy was right up. They did not put that into the gameplay at all. Like, he didn't get any water. It was just a thing. That was something I always thought about when I played Uncharted 3. I was like, he didn't actually get any water. And once he gets into the fight, it's just back to normal. They don't reference it again that he was in the desert for like a day and thirsting and dying. Something I thought I'd mention because I always thought that was kind of funny. But they land in the water. They end up seeing a resort, and it's like, oh, cool. So they just swim to the resort. They come up on the beach. Epic cameo by, of course, Nolan North, who is the one, well, I shouldn't say the one and only now, but he is the voice actor, of course, for Nathan Drake in the Uncharted franchise. And that was really cool. And he actually got a couple lines. It was like, what the hell happened to you guys? Fell out of a plane, got hit by a car, fell out of a plane, and swam here. And then he was just like, huh, something like that kind of happened to me one time. And it was like, and it was like, okay. And then they just walked away, and I was like, cool. He got like a decent little chunk of time. Nolan North, that was great. So he got a cool reference. I was hoping he'd be in it. I found out he was in it because of a YouTube video I watched anyway, where they're like, I got to talk to him. It was with Tom Holland. And he mentioned them talking to each other. So I was like, oh, okay. I knew that it was coming up, and I was kind of waiting like the whole movie, like, when's it gonna happen? Where is he at? Where's Nolan North? What are they gonna do? And it was a great sequence. He got to just sit on the beach, say some lines, and kind of just relax at the resort. And I was like, that's a good cameo. He got to relax and just say some cool stuff. And then they just kept moving, and it was like, cool cameo. So I love that. And then the movie happens. Nate and Chloe have teamed up. Sully literally just vanishes. Like, he went off the plane with the parachute, and he was just gone. And then eventually he ended up finding Nate. I don't know how he found Nate. That still confuses me, because they show that he has the tracker on the phone. The thing that confuses me is that Nate went to get to the boats. He tricked Chloe, who betrays him at the end of the movie, which I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I was kind of surprised that they did it that way. But she ends up betraying him, but he wrote like a fake note, so he ends up going to the actual destination. The villains, who apparently weren't really far away, I thought that they were like in a really far away location. They were like just on like a different little coast, like kind of around the corner, and then she saw the boat and then was looking out and saw him and was like, what the F? Like, we need to follow him because he's going somewhere, so let's see where he goes. And they got to him. How did Sully get there before they got there and not get seen by them? Because he didn't say like, oh, they're gearing up to blow a hole in the wall, or they are crowding over, the hole that you swam through. Like, I didn't, he didn't say anything about like a bunch of boats. Did he have a boat? He didn't come down from the top, like giant hole that was perfect for them to pick up the boats and airlift them. So I don't understand how he managed to get there behind Nate after he was already seen. But somehow Sully didn't mention like, hey, they're coming up close, or he didn't run into them somehow going to the exact same location. He also had to have been really far away because it was just an open island. So I'm like, either he was on the ground already, which once again, he would have had to have come down from the giant hole, which doesn't make sense because he wouldn't have known exactly what the location was. Or even if he did, he wouldn't have known exactly where he was going anyway. So I'm like, if he took a boat, he would have been easy to spot. Nate would have seen him from like a mile backwards. He could have looked over his shoulder and been like, that boat's still there. So I was confused by that because I'm like, Nate got there. As soon as he went past them, the bad guys were like, that's him. We see him going to a different spot. And then Sully somehow got there before they got there. And he didn't reference anything. Like, he wasn't seen. He didn't reference that they may or may not have been loading up their boats to follow right behind them. And I was just like, that doesn't make sense. Once again, blockbuster stuff. You just keep going. And I was just like, that doesn't make sense how he got there before they got there. But it is what it is. Once again, you just keep going. So they go through, they find the gold, of course. Everything happens. Nothing supernatural. I will mention that. That was something that I always enjoyed from the games. I know some people didn't. I always liked it. The first game had it, and then the second game had it, and then the third game, it was technically a hallucination, and then the fourth game had nothing. That kind of disappointed me. I was like, I like the supernatural stuff. Also, they killed. Man, I know that Amy Hennig was leading up to something, because every game had, like, the Nazi connection, and I was like, I kind of want to see where they go with this. They were clearly just going to straight up fight modern-day Nazis dealing with supernatural stuff, but I think because Amy Hennig left, that's not what ended up happening. But I'm like, that was clearly a thing, because every time they did it, it was like, the Nazis were here before us. That was clearly meant to be a thing for the franchise, where they were straight up gonna fight modern day Nazis. I know it. And then things changed. So it's like, that's clearly what they were leading up to, because they did it every game. But I always wanted that. I like the supernatural stuff. I was fine that they didn't do it here, because it would have been so late into the movie to finally introduce it. In the game, you can introduce it in the last quarter, because it's like, or last third, because like the last third is still probably like 3 or 4 hours of the game, but the last third of a movie is like the last 40 minutes. So it's like, I understand it's fine to not add anything supernatural in the last third of a film, because you really don't have a lot of time to be like, oh, this is how this makes sense. And it's like, it's gold, I'm fine, it was cool, it didn't need to be supernatural, I'm okay with it. Aside from Sully showing up, nothing supernatural happened. So they find out it's gold. Of course, the villains blow a hole in the wall, they get into the boats. Everything's crazy. They airlift them out, and then we have a really good sequence where I was like, this is not from the games. At first it was like Uncharted 4, because they're gold on a pirate ship. And then it was like, all right, they got the ships in the air, and I was like, this is not from Uncharted. This is an Uncharted feeling thing, though. They're on 2 pirate ships flying through the sky as 2 helicopters carry them to boats. And I was like, this is really good. It was actually a really good action sequence. They're going around as the ships sway through the air, and they have to do like really fast maneuvers with Sully. Sometimes the ships hit each other and clash, and so they're stuck together, and they have to figure out how to do this and do that. I was like, all right, that adds to the craziness of the scene. And as they do that, we actually get this costume right here. You can't really see it because of how it's done, but we get the classic Nathan Drake costume, because of course he wears different outfits and stuff, but he has the beige Henley on, and then he puts on the holster straps, and it's like, they play the theme, and I was like, I'm not gonna lie, hearing the main theme of Uncharted in a movie, I got kind of hyped. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Oddly enough, considering the third game is 10 years old already, more than 10 years old, technically that's nostalgic for me, because the theme is that old. So I was like, this is pretty cool. Like, he put the straps on, and then they played the theme, and I was like, that's pretty nice. And then I think he shot like one person, and then he dropped the gun, and it was like, okay, no big deal. But it was really cool. I was like, okay, I love hearing the theme. The outfit was, like I said, it was the main outfit. And they have an insane moment where he's fighting people on boats. Like, him and Sully team up at first, and then Sully climbs up. He takes over the helicopter, so they're trying to fly away. And then it's like, hey, follow the ship, which is a terrible idea, because I'm like, the dude's in a helicopter carrying a pirate ship. You could probably drop your pirate ship, like, half a mile. It wasn't even 2 miles. It was like, you're like half a mile away from your ship. Just drop your one pirate ship over there, and then you have a helicopter with way less weight, and then you can just fly over to his helicopter faster. But she wanted to kill him, so whatever. Once again, ignore logic, because I'm just like, you could have literally just dropped the boat, and you would have been totally fine. Like, he wasn't going to go anywhere. He has a boat attached to a helicopter. He couldn't have dropped it and figured something out in 2.5 minutes. Like, they, boom, drop this, we got him. Where's he going to land that you wouldn't see the boat from fucking 5 miles away? Like, it was just weird to me. I'm like, dude, you just drop the boat off and chase him. But then they actually would have won. The villains would have done something smart, and you can't have that in any sort of writing in any way, shape, or form. So, of course, they chase him down with the boat hanging from their helicopter, even though they could have dropped it off. And so that leads to them flying around and doing all sorts of madness, and then crashing the boats together, which was really cool. And it was just insane, and it was actually really fun. Every villain gets absolutely eviscerated. Like, people fall off the boats, they hit the rocks, they get crushed by the boat. Like, Braddock gets straight up crushed by the boat, because I thought they were going to do a thing where it's like, oh, she's going to live into the next movie, and that'll kind of be the carryover villain. And they're like, nah, we're getting rid of all this crap. Helicopter crash, it slammed it went just ass over tea kettle, boom, right into a cliff, killed the Scottish dude who was really funny in the beginning, and just wiped all of them out. Boat falls, she looks up and is like, oh yeah, she's toast. Crushes her head, she's game over. She dies, they lose all the boats. They talk about getting the diamond thing, which was what I thought before Nate said, and it's like, we couldn't get one before they do. And it's like, oh, that makes perfect sense. So the gold belongs to the country now. And then Nate's like, hey, I got some pieces of gold. We see Chloe, and she's like, ooh. And then they leave her. And it was pretty much the end of the movie. And then we get 2 post-credit sequences, or 2 mid-credit sequences. Sam's alive. What a shock. The other one was much better. Nate is not only in his exact costume from Uncharted 3. Actually, they both are. Because when Sully comes in and he has like that green shirt, that's what he's wearing in that flashback from Uncharted 3 as well. So those costumes are exactly the costumes that they have in Uncharted 3 during that specific flashback sequence when they actually first met. So they had him in the Henley with like the red sleeves. Like that's exactly what he wore in the flashback. And then Sully also comes in with the mustache, but he had that green shirt, with the design on it. It was like exactly the same. Like they made the shirts, and I was like, that's actually really cool. So they have that. They reference Roman, who is the main villain from the first game. They show that, the thing they were looking for was like a map, and it had some Nazi stuff on it. So I'm like, okay, they're kind of getting into the pseudo-classic territory of the first game. And then they do that, and they ended on such a weird way because they literally ended it. It was like, okay, they escaped from like that room, and then they turn around and it's like, oh crap. And I'm like, I was basically expecting to actually see something, but it was almost like they were literally in the middle of an adventure, and then it made me really want to see what happened next. So I'm like, I almost expected a reveal of a character when they did it that way, where they got busted, and I'm just like, they could have just ended it where it was like they made a joke, but that's like their whole adventure. It kind of does make sense to end it that way, where it's like they thought they escaped, and then there's like, oh crap. And then that's how you end it. It's like, it does kind of fit Uncharted, but it did make me want to see it more because I was like, they had to quit. That moment was where they had the most chemistry because now they are officially Nate and Sully from the franchise. So they have the jokes like, oh, what's that on your face? And it's like, oh, puberty's right around the corner. All those jokes. I was like, this is hitting because this feels, oddly enough, this feels more like the Nate and Sully of actual Uncharted than pretty much the whole movie, because they had to do that weird arc with Sully where he was an absolutely horrible person who would let anyone die to get the treasure, and then he eventually warmed up to Nate at the end and was like, oh, I actually like this kid. We're actual real friends now. And so then they were able to make this silly, funny jokes at the, in like the mid-credit sequence that really felt like Uncharted. And it was like, that's why I think a sequel could do good. But we got what we got, and I do hope we get a sequel. I genuinely believe that, considering how much I did enjoy this movie, didn't blow me away, but it was definitely good enough to be like, if they made a sequel, I think it could be good. I think this movie's okay. Just good enough. I think they could actually make a sequel that's good to almost great, if not actually great. I genuinely believe that. So I actually do hope we get a sequel for this, and we'll see what happens ultimately if it makes enough money. It's hard for me to say. Like I said, I went at like basically 12 or 1 o'clock, so there's like 5 people. So that doesn't bode too well. But maybe it'll make enough money. Who knows? I'll hold out hope that it makes enough money, and then we can get like a really, really good movie for the sequel. So that's my thoughts on it. I clearly didn't run through the spoilers as much as I thought I was going to, or it was going to be super fast. I thought it would be, but apparently I had a lot of random things that, like, as I was going through, it popped into my head. Like the whole Sully thing, I had that plan. I knew I was going to rant about that because I was just like, I hated him. He was just a douchebag. But yeah, I forgot about him popping up at the end where I was just like, that doesn't make sense. The random things that I thought about while watching it actually came back in. But would love to know your thoughts if you saw the movie. Please put your comments down in the comment section below. Let me know your favorite parts about it, your least favorite parts about it. In the ranking of video game movies, where would you put this? Sonic, like I said, I think is number 1. It's hard for me to say what I would consider number 2. I know a lot of people still hold on to Mortal Kombat as like the best video game movie. I was young, admittedly. I always like Annihilation more because I like the fact that I felt like it was just more entertaining with the action and stuff. It is objectively a worse movie. I can admit that for sure. It's like, I love the Super Mario Brothers movie because I watched it as a kid like 100 times. It's a weird, bad movie, but I still really like it because I saw it as a kid and I was just like, I just enjoy it. I still enjoy it. It's like, it's not a good video game movie, and it's probably not the best movie, but I still enjoy it. So for me, it's just like, the ranking and stats and all that stuff when it comes to video game movies is super weird. But I say this one is definitely up there. It's one that if I had to rewatch it, I wouldn't be like, oh, this is going to suck. The jokes were actually funny. The action was actually entertaining to watch. So it's not a bad movie. It's probably in the top 5, which isn't saying that much. It's Sonic, the very first Resident Evil movie, which still blows my mind. I'm still pissed about the remake, the newest live-action Resident Evil. Somehow, the first live-action Resident Evil movie, I still think is the best one. Because all the other ones in that series were trash. And then the newest one was trash. So it's like, I don't know how they do it. But somehow video game movies, they just keep being real bad. But at least we have another okay one. So you can watch it and enjoy it. I could even watch it a second time and be like, okay, that still wasn't bad. And I enjoyed parts of it for sure. So, not a high bar. But hey, that's where we are. That's all you can say. Is like, it's not a high bar, but it's just where we're at. We just hope they get better and better. Sonic 2 is coming out. Knuckles is in it. They're already talking about a spinoff show. at least Sonic is doing something, which is crazy. It's not even, once again, it's not that great of a Sonic adaptation. He's not even in the Sonic world. It's more Sonic Adventures. But that ain't that bad either. So it is what it is where we are right now for video game movies. But we'd love to know your thoughts on this, so please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.